In Nigeria and much of Africa, Christianity has become a major faith, yet traditional spiritual practices and beliefs remain deeply rooted. This intersection of Christianity and African tradition raises important questions. How do these two worldviews coexist? How do Nigerians navigate their faith in a context where traditional culture is still vibrant? Let's explore the complex relationship between Christianity and African tradition and what it means for spirituality, identity, and community in Nigeria. The conversation with Mercy Upa speaks with Reverend Father Michael Meladu, Chairman, Christian Pilgrims Welfare Board, Benue State. I'm so glad you could make it. This is one profound conversation that I've been looking forward to, and I'm glad you're here. We're having a conversation about African tradition and the place of Christianity. Do you see an intersection between traditional religion and Christianity?
Well, I think it is imperative we do some kind of conceptual clarification so that our viewers and listeners will understand what we mean when we say what. It has to do with a vast, diverse system of practices that has to do with respect for elders, worship and rituals to the gods and deities of the land. It has to do with veneration of the ancestors. And this also involves some arts like music, like dancing and a good other ones. So that's what when we talk about African tradition, these are the type of things that come to mind. And Christianity, on the other hand, is a religious belief that has to do with the person of Christ, the incarnate Word of God. The belief that God became man, suffered, died, was buried, and then resurrected, and has established a church that teaches humanity how to live and then make heaven at the end of the day. Now, coming to the question of convergence between the African tradition and the Christianity, there's a whole lot that bring the two together. African tradition has so much to do with communal living. An injury to one is an injury to all. And as you have it in the philosophical tenets of African philosophy, echoed by Mbiti, where he says, I am because we are, and because we are, I am. Now, when you come to Christianity, that love of God and love of neighbor that's so much emphasized. These have brought the two together.
Okay.
Then you can also look at it from the point of moral values. Like the value of truth, the value of sincerity. These are celebrated in the African tradition, just as we also have them in Christianity. We can as well talk about what we call the sacredness of human life. No one is allowed to take human life in African and tradition, just as no one is allowed to kill in Christianity. So there are a good number of things that bring
I see how they intersect now. It's actually beautiful. But is there any aspect that is incomparable between the African tradition and Christianity?
Yeah, there are a number of things done in African tradition that are not compatible with the gospel value. One of them is what do you call it, the blood sacrifice. It is believed that man sinned against God and consequently ran short of God's grace. And God, being a God of justice, passed the death sentence on humanity. But again, being a God of compassion, at the appointed time sent his son, who came and died and shed his blood on the cross and paid for humanity once and for all. So in Christianity, it is believed that you don't need to shed any other kind of blood again for human salvation, for human problems, and for any other reason at all. That the blood of Christ was shed once and for all. So when you begin to offer, be it human sacrifice, being it sacrificing any animal, then that goes contrary to the gospel value. There is yet another aspect of African tradition that goes contrary to the gospel value, which is witchcraft.
Okay.
Yeah, when you manipulate the forces of nature for the sole purpose of harming somebody or getting somebody charmed, and in worst case scenario having somebody killed, that goes contrary to the gospel value. And when you begin to use charms and some other spiritual forces for self-preservation, for self-protection, that also goes contrary to the gospel message, because here in Christianity we believe that God should do practically everything for us by way of protection.
I see how there is some comparison and again the difference, between African traditional Christianity. But I also understand that as Africans, we have had culture and tradition for a very long time. We have embraced it as a way of life before Christianity was introduced onto us, and many embrace this Christianity. But there are times where there is these cultural expectations around traditions that even as Christians, it's imperative to not bow to these demands. So how do you navigate, between cultural demands and Christian faith?
Even Christianity as we have it today is embedded with a whole lot of Western cultures. And then the missionaries brought it to us here in Africa. And mind you, before the coming of Christianity, we had our cultural values, we had our traditions, which were keeping our people. And then we also had African traditional religion, which was a way of our people having an encounter and interaction with the divine. With the coming of Christianity, some of the Christian values oppose our cultures, they oppose our tradition. So when you are a Christian, you are caught between being a complete Christian and then also being an African.
No in between?
Yeah, no. It can be very, very difficult to be completely a Christian and completely an African. It's almost impossible to embrace Christianity without giving away something that has to do with your culture. Now that is where the issue of enculturation comes in.
Yeah.
When you talk about enculturation, it's about harvesting something that is positive, something that is productive from other cultures, and then you bring it into the Christian religion. You Christianize it, and that makes you to remain a cultural person while also remaining a Christian.
Okay, but how do you think Christianity has impacted our African tradition, though?
Christianity has impacted our culture in so many ways. One of our values, one of our traditions that have been so much impacted by Christianity is marriage. All right. Before the coming of Christian religion, we had our own way of contracting marriages. And marriages here in Africa were seen as a relationship between a family and another family, between a community and another community. That is why when you come to Africa, you hear people make expressions such as our wife, our husband, right? When you are getting married to a family, if you are getting married to a particular family, you are getting married to the entire family, and by extension, you are getting married to the entire community. So when Africans say our wife, they mean it very literally. And marriage is strictly between one man and a woman, and there shouldn't be any interference whatsoever. That is contrary to our culture. And before the coming of Christianity, Africans were not in the habit of taking one wife. We are polygamous culturally. Now Christianity came to say, hello, one man, one woman. So that has impacted our culture. Before now, to be a famous man, what a Tima will call a shagbao.
Okay.
You need to take a number of wives. You need to have a lot of children. You need to keep a very large family for you to be referred to as shagbao. With the coming of Christianity, that is no longer the case. So that has impacted us. The way burials were conducted in our culture before the coming of Christianity is no longer what we're experiencing currently. Before now, the longer period of time you imbibe your relation and keep the person there, either in the mortuary or in the traditional way, it was considered to be a way of showing off how rich, how influential, how powerful you are in the society. But currently, the church has set the number of days that the dead person must never be kept. So these are some of the ways that Christianity has impacted our way of life.
But are there aspects of African tradition that you feel should be preserved alongside Christianity?
A whole lot of our culture, our traditions as Africans, that must be preserved alongside with Christianity. Like the issue of morality. Then in the African tradition, in African culture, the value of sincerity, the value of truthfulness. That when somebody says yes, it is yes. When somebody says no, it is no. It is the same thing that the Bible tells us, that as a child of God, as a Christian, when you say yes, let it be yes, and when you say no, let it be no. We talk about sexual morality. In African culture, here in Tivland, we had what we call the girl court, right? A young girl coming up was initiated into the court, and then the symbol of that court was hung on the girl's neck, which is the empty shell of a snail, right? And it was believed that if this girl happens to have sexual intercourse with this symbol on her neck, it is either she would never get pregnant in her life, she will become sterilized, or if she gives birth to children, they will die. I was believed that if any man had sexual intercourse with a girl who was having that symbol on her neck, such a man would become permanently impotent. So sexual morality was celebrated among the tea people. It was only on the day a girl was meant to be handed over to her husband, some rituals were performed to cleanse her from that symbol, and then it was removed from her neck and she was handed over to the husband. So the issue of abortion, premature sex, and then most of the sicknesses people are suffering today as a result of sexual immorality, they were not common among the tea people. So these values must be inculcated into the Christian religion.
How about in terms of worship? Because how do you reconcile ancestral reverence with the concept of Christian worship?
There were a whole lot of misconceptions when the missionaries came to introduce Christianity to our people.
Okay.
They were not having a clear, in-depth knowledge of African traditional religion. They were calling it ancestral worship. That was what they termed it. But ideally, in all sincerity, we don't worship ancestors. We venerate them. Veneration is completely different from worship, right? Our people in the African sector believe that ancestors are living in the ancestral world, where they are very close to the supreme being, the one we referred to among the tea people as Aund, the one the Igbos will call Chineke, you know. So they believe that when they pass their prayers to these ancestors can now approach divinity, which is completely unapproachable by humans. And then through these ancestors, their prayers will be listened to. So it was lack of knowledge about African traditional religion, about African cultures and traditions that made the missionaries to paint a picture that we're worshiping ancestors.
Okay, what's your take on the role of spirituality in shaping African societies, past and present?
You know, among the tea people, we talk about the traditional way that our people used to invoke God, which is Aund, right? It is said that during those days, if it was raining and the rain was becoming so violent and there was so much of thunder and lightning, an elderly man would come into the rain and invoke the name of God. And it was said, he would say, Aundu Babijua, Aundu Yoku, Aundu Zaka. No, Julie. You know, you may translate that into English to say, you will say, God of Babijua, God of Adzaka, God of Yoko. let the rain fall very gently and with tranquility. Now, if we trace this very
And
deeply,
it did happen?
oh, it did.
Wow.
It did happen. Now, if you go into the in-depth analysis of African traditional religion and the studies that follow it, you will discover that this invocation is somehow influenced by Christianity. You know, with the Christian knowledge of God of Abraham, God of Isaac,
Jacob.
God of Jacob. You know, so this has gone a long way in influencing our people and reshaping the spiritual world of the African people.
Okay, as a way of wrapping up, because, and I'm so glad we're having these conversations, because I've experienced, especially as a young person, where sometimes you're caught between your Christian faith and having to some expectations around your tradition, especially coming from a place. And this is actually clearing the air for me, and of course, you know, some of our viewers out there watching. So as a way of wrapping up now, let's be more even practical. If, as a Christian, some people believe that if I declare my faith, I should stick strictly to it. I should have no business whatsoever with my tradition or culture.
You see, in very, very practical terms, let's put it this way. When Christian missionaries found themselves on the shores of Africa, they made a whole lot of very terrible mistakes. They demonized practically everything about African tradition, demonized practically everything about African cultures and traditions. All right, in an attempt to plant Christianity. The Christianity they brought to us was planted on a shallow ground, and therefore it lacked a taproot that will make it to stand very firm and strong amongst our people. And that is why most of the times when people are confronted with real life situations, they roll back to their root. So that is where the question of enculturation and acculturation comes. This is where they come in. These guys came here and made us to believe that you can't use an African name to receive baptism. For me to be baptized, I need to bear the name Michael. I have to be Titus, I have to be Lucy, I have to be Agnes for me to be baptized. Look, the name Titus, where it originates from, it's just like somebody bearing the name Tena, just like somebody bearing the name Ngona, somebody bearing the name Teru, all right? And then eventually these guys worship God, eventually they died, and the church saw something positive in them, and then they were canonized. They became saints. What stops me from answering the name Aondehumba as my baptismal name? Eventually, I will become a saint. And when I become a saint with the name Aondehumba, people will start answering that name subsequently. So currently, the church in Africa is redefining most of these things, okay? So you can use your traditional name now to receive baptism. You can be baptized as Aondehumba. You can be baptized as Tena. You can be baptized as Ngondo. And all of those things, you can now use them for baptism. All right? And then, if we are talking about enculturation and acculturation, it also has to do with bringing out things that are positive in African traditional religion, in African cultures, in African tradition, and bringing them and planting, allowing them to take root into Christianity. Now, the Christian religion has to borrow certain things in our culture, and our culture also has to blend itself into Christianity. There are many things we are doing in Africa here which are purely scientific. But our people have attached some level of spirituality on them and have created some level of mysticism around them, right?
Yeah.
If you go to where road construction is going on, road contractors setting on fire certain chemicals that when they are sent into the atmosphere, they disperse the crowd and then it prevents rain from coming down. That is scientific. Now, our people discovered those things even before Christianity came here. We have people who are rainmakers. These are herbs in nature, planted there by God. And then you discover them, right? It is scientific. All you need to do is to teach the formula to anyone who understands it. And then when the person carries it out, it happens. You can dispel rain. There are certain ones will burn on fire that can gather rain, can gather crowds and make rain to do what? To fall. It's not something fetish. It's not something demonic. These people carrying out road construction in Makurdi here, they do that when they don't want rain to fall. And they make it come down when they want it to fall. It is scientific. So why can't we borrow this from Western civilization, which is embedded into Christianity, and make this thing scientific? There are many elders who have died with this knowledge, shrouded in secrecy, shrouded in mysticism. Why these things are scientific? The same thing with African medicine. All right, there are natural herbs, natural roots planted there in nature, and God has given us the knowledge that if we pick this and this and this and combine them together, they can take care of fibroid. They can take care of a morbid dysentery. They can take care of a kidney stone. They can take care of liver problem. Now, an African discovers it, right? And then, after putting them in the pot, he begins to carry out certain incantations that have practically nothing to do with those roots. He tells you to bring a fowl that must be
and
killed.
makes it entirely spiritual.
It's spiritual.
And scary.
You understand?
Yeah.
Now Christianity now says, look, you don't need to shed any other blood. Christ's blood is sufficient to give life. It's sufficient to give liberation. You know, so it is a question of African tradition taking a look at things that are positive in Christianity and embedding them into our culture.
Yeah.
Christianity taking a look at things that are very good in our culture, in our religion, and then bringing them into Christianity, so that Africans can be completely Africans and completely Christians.
And then the problem again with African tradition, I see in the aspects of medicine now, herbs,
Yes.
using herbs, is sometimes the cause that they attribute to certain ailments. Whereas if you go to the hospital, they may tell you this is malaria, right? And they'll give you drugs that will cure that. An African traditionalist can equally give you herbs that will still cure that, but then they will call it a different name. They may say somebody bewitched you, somebody did this to you, whereas it's just simple malaria.
Yeah,
but the herbs will work on you,
Yeah.
and that not affect your faith.
You know, in African tradition, in African traditional religion, for something to be of value and for the personnel involved to be of value and have some kind of esteem and aura around themselves, they must create some level of mysticism. You know, if you are told that this sickness is caused by bacteria, by virus, by any other thing, it makes it light. But when you are told that there is a witch or wizard somewhere who is trying to bewitch you, and then you need certain materials to get such forces arrested, it makes a whole lot of meaning. If you go to Ohom Monastery there in Enugu, and then you go to Ewo Monastery there in Benin, they have standard traditional medicine that are certified by NAFDAC. They are properly registered by NAFDAC, and NAFDAC goes to their laboratories to check the production process, and scientifically they are certified as medicine that can take care of almost every sickness you can imagine. Now, how do they go about it? When you are sick and you go to this monastery, they have a laboratory. You are subjected to laboratory test, and then the result comes out. When they now know what your problem is, they pick up the traditional medicine that can take care of that sickness and give it to you, without necessarily telling you that you have been bewitched by an old woman in your village, without necessarily telling you that why you have been unable to conceive and give birth to children is because your mother-in-law, you know, doesn't want you to have children. You know, so this is the way you can marry these two. And then our people will start having this conflict of putting one leg here and then the other way. I mean, the other way.
Whereas it's just one leg in one.
Yeah.
Same old thing.
Yes.
Just some people put in fear and other things.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Okay, let's just have your conclusion to our viewers watching out there.
You see, we are Africans, and it is practically impossible for us to be totally broken away from our tradition, from our culture. It is practically impossible. Any people who have lost their culture, who have lost their tradition, they have stopped existing. They are just floating. And that has happened to us as Africans. We are totally broken away from our tradition, from our culture, with the intention of becoming westernized. And it is also impossible for us to be totally westernized. Now we can't come back, we can't go forward, we're now hanging somewhere in the balance. I traveled to Germany to have my studies with a young man who also came here from Nigeria, a colleague of mine. So when we got there, he was struggling to start speaking like the German people. All right. So the effort he was putting into speaking like a German used to bury the audibility to the point that when he's talking, you hardly can hear him. He forced himself to be talking through his nose. At the end of the day, the Germans were not hearing him, and we, his brothers, were not hearing him either. So one day I called him and said, my friend, you have lost your language. We cannot hear you. The people you are trying to impress cannot hear you either. So we need to strike this balance. And I've said it time without number in the course of this interview, the positive aspects of our culture and medicine, very beautiful. Morality, African morality, very beautiful. Sacredness of human life, what we call it, truthfulness, sincerity. These are things we celebrate, and this is what the gospel value is also all about. So when we embrace them, we can become truly Africans and truly Christians.
Thank you so much, Father, for this beautiful conversation with us.
The pleasure is mine.
All right. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to the channel. Merci. Upa.